Hey everybody, welcome back to Biblical Greek Made Easy. This is class 6, and you're over halfway done now with module 1 of Biblical Greek Made Easy. You're halfway to mastering nouns or something close to that. Isn't that exciting? You're making progress. You're stepping forward. I'm proud of you. Make sure you celebrate. You mark this a little bit and keep going. Don't quit. You're doing good. You're making progress, but we got to keep going. And let me encourage you today with these words. With great power comes great responsibility. Or it can be said a different way, to whom much is given, much is required. The first one's Spider-Man, the second one's Jesus, but they're both true. They're both speaking truth. That as we learn more and as we grow, as we develop tools, we have this responsibility. There's more required of us, okay? We're responsible to use the tools that we've been given. We're responsible to be accurate truth tellers and accurate interpreters of the scriptures that we're studying. And we want to be faithful witnesses to that. Okay? So to whom much is given, much is required. We want to take that seriously. Now, here's the tip of the day. I want you to get comfortable applying what you know in different ways. Get comfortable applying what you know in different ways. Since this is Biblical Greek Made Easy and language builds on itself, what happens is you're going to learn something and then we're going to add another layer after that, and then we're going to add another layer. And so you may get this feeling where you go, man, I feel like I just learned something and I'm just starting to feel comfortable. And then we put another layer on, which kind of changes things and messes it all up, okay? I want you to sort of get used to that feeling of things growing and getting more complex because, hey, again, to whom much is given, much is required. The further we walk this path, we can expect things to get slightly more complicated, okay? That's part of the process, and that's good. And remember, you're learning a new language, you're using parts of your brain that perhaps you haven't used in a long time, and this is new and it's different, but it's good, and so be encouraged. Keep going. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Today we're going to learn the third declension of nouns, okay? And why does this matter? Well, we have to learn the weird nouns, okay? We've learned the more basic ones, but in every language, particularly in Greek and certainly in English, there's always going to be certain patterns that are just kind of off the beaten path, that are a little different, that are a little weird. And so we're going to learn the weird nouns now. And this is the third and final pattern of noun endings that we're going to learn. Okay? There's not like a fourth, fifth, and sixth declension that's like waiting out there to jump out and scare you. This is the last one. There's only 3. And then finally, these patterns that we learn are going to show up other places too. So remember last chapter, we saw that these patterns that we encounter with adjectives, I told you that those are going to show up later, and that's true, they will. These patterns that we see in third declension nouns are going to show up later when we study participles in module 2. So be aware of that. So let's get going. Remember, when we talk about declension, a declension is a big fancy grammatical word, but it really just means a pattern. It's a pattern of the way a word behaves. Remember, we joked that it sounds like a complicated yoga move that perhaps we can't fit into. I certainly can't get in a complicated yoga move like that. But that's not what a declension is. A declension is just a pattern of the way a word behaves. Remember, we looked at a bunch of different words that you make singulars into plural in English just by adding an S. And then there's a different pattern where you have to add an ES, and a different pattern where you have to change the whole word entirely, like from mouse to mice, or man to men, that sort of thing. It's a different word. It doesn't follow those other rules, okay? So when we talk about declensions, we're talking about these noun patterns. And you've seen case ending charts like this before. And I've pointed out to you before these numbers at the top of these columns where it says to masculine. That's a second declension pattern. The one fem, or first feminine. This is a feminine pattern. This is a feminine declension. And then neuter is also a second declension. And these are not new. This isn't a new paradigm you have to learn right here. These are the same endings that you already know that jive really well with the definite articles. And these are pretty common words and forms that you've seen before. Now, what do those first and second declension mean? We've already seen the first declension, like our feminine nouns. And this is when the stem of the word ends in an alpha or an eta. Remember that nominative singular for the feminine doesn't take an ending, and it always ends in either that alpha or that eta. Second declension are those nouns that end in an omicron. So masculine and neuter both have stems that end in omicron, and they take slightly different endings, but they still follow that same pattern, what we call the second declension. For the third declension, the third pattern, this is going to be the pattern for nouns where the stem is going to end in a consonant. Okay, so for that reason, they're more complex, because notice for first declension, we just have alpha or eta. For second declension, we just have omicron. But for third declension, it can be a bunch of different consonants. So for that reason, it's going to be more complex. Now, there's going to be some new endings that you'll see that we'll have to learn. There's going to be some endings that are the same. That's good news. We already know those. And then there's going to be some endings that are the same. They're regular endings, but because of the way they're going to jive with the end of the stem, they're going to do weird things, and they might look different even though the endings are the same. So let me show you what I mean. We're going to start by looking at Mounce's hints, okay? So this is where Mounce does a really good job at making this easy for us. He's going to give us 4 hints of things to notice with these third declension nouns. And you can find these if you're using the 4th edition of the Mounce textbook. You can find this on pages 95 and 96. But here's what he says about the hints. Hint number 1 is that a lot of weird stuff is going to happen in the nominative singular. And here's why. The ending for the nominative singular, just like second declension, like logos, for example, the ending is a sigma. But if we have a stem that ends in a consonant, and then we have a sigma that goes on the end, that consonant sigma construction is just prone to be weird in Greek, okay? So, for our example here, we have sarc in the middle of the screen there, sigma, alpha, rho, kappa. That's our stem. And then we're going to add the sigma ending to it, but the result isn't going to be sigma, alpha, rho, kappa, sigma. Instead, the kappa sigma is going to combine and transform. And it's going to become a kasi, which is kind of like the letter X, okay? Imagine that in English, anytime a KS showed up, that it changed to an X. That doesn't happen in English, but in Greek, that's going to be pretty regular. So instead of sigma, alpha, rho, kappa, sigma, we're going to have sigma, alpha, rho, kasi. It's like it simplifies, okay? And so we get the word sarx. Now, can you recognize sarx as ending in a sigma? Well, it doesn't end in a sigma, but we kind of see that in there, right? That's that ending that's sort of assumed in there. We see that sigma ending. So that's going to be the nominative singular form of sarx, which means flesh, by the way. You see that's very similar to logos. It's the same ending. It's just doing something a little bit different because it has that kappa ending to the stem. That's hint number 1, is that a lot of weird stuff is going to happen in the nominative singular. And what's going on there with that kappa sigma combining, it's something that we call the square of stops. The square of stops. So there's different kinds of letters, and you see in this chart here that I put on the screen, on the left side of the column, there's the labial letters, the velar letters, and the dental letters, and they're named this way based on how your tongue and your lips and your teeth kind of all work together to say and pronounce these letters. And then across the top, you have the unvoiced, the voiced, and the aspirate, or the breathing, where you're pushing air through your mouth to make these sounds, okay? And this is a square of stops, and you'll want to review this in the book, but basically when these letters come in contact with certain other letters, there's just going to be change that happens, okay? So we saw the kappa, which is, you see the unvoiced velar, the k sound, the like a K in English, okay? When it came in contact with that sigma, it changed to a kasi. That's going to happen for the kappa, the gamma, and the ki. All of those are going to behave the same way. Now, this may seem weird and irregular, but I would suggest to you that this square of stops, this changing of a kappa sigma as one example, changing that to a kasi, is Very common in Greek. It's not going to be irregular. It's not going to be weird. It's just the way things happen. Okay? So let's move to Mounce's hint number 2. He says, whatever weirdness happens in the nominative singular also happens in the dative plural. Now, the reason that is because the dative plural ending is going to be a sigma iota. Remember, iota is that sign of the dative. We've seen that a lot, either iota subscript or as part of the ending. Well, it's true here too. We have sigma iota as the ending of dative plural for the third declension. And so notice, since we're going to have that sigma coming in contact with the stem, just like we did with nominative singular, whatever weirdness we had in nominative singular, we're going to have in dative plural. So notice there, nominative singular is sarx, dative plural is sarxi. So we still have that square of stops thing happening, but we just have a letter after it, which is also part of the ending. Okay? So we expect weird things to happen in nominative singular and dative plural. Now, hint number 3. A nu drops out when followed by a sigma. So, for example, if we have a noun where the stem ends in a nu, when we add that sigma on the end, the nu is going to disappear. So for this example here, you see we have this word, the lexical form is tis. You see the stem is tau iota nu, tin. Okay? And when we put the sigma on the end, it becomes tins, not really tins, because that nu is going to drop out and it's going to become tis. Why does that happen? Well, apparently in the Greek language, they just don't think that nu sigma sounds good together, and so that nu is going to drop out. And so we get tis. Tis is an important word. It's going to mean a certain one, like talking about someone, like a certain man walked down the road, that sort of thing. There's also another version of this word, tis, that's going to have an accent. Notice the one you're looking at here does not have an accent in the lexical form. There's another word, tis, that's going to behave and conjugate and the paradigm is going to look exactly the same except for the difference of this accent. Tis with the accent in the lexical form is going to be the interrogative pronoun, which means who, what, why, etc. Like if you're asking a question, like who is the man who stole my peanut butter, that sort of thing, right? So tis is a third declension noun, and it behaves weirdly because that nu is going to drop out. I'm going to show you the paradigm for tis in just a minute. Hint number 4 is that a tau drops out when followed by a sigma, or at the end of a word. So look at that example in the middle of the page there. Onomat is our stem. The lexical form is onoma, you see there on the left. And in the neuter nominative singular form, in third declension here, it's not going to take an ending for that case. So since that leaves the tau at the end of the word, it's going to drop off. And we're left with onoma. And it means name. Onoma means name in Greek. Now, the example below, you see onomat again. And we're going to add the dative plural ending, for example. And we get sigma iota. And so that tau isn't going to want to stay and be right next to the sigma. The sigma always causes weird stuff to happen in words like this. So the tau is going to drop off, and we get onomasi. So that's the dative neuter plural version of onoma. Now remember, the gender of these words are fixed. It's not like adjectives that we looked at last time that can be any gender, any number, any case. Because remember, adjectives have to bend their will, so to speak, bend their gender to the noun that they're modifying. Nouns have a fixed gender, and these that we're looking at here do as well. So let's look at the paradigm. Here are 2 third declension words, sarx and onoma. Sarx means flesh, as we said, and onoma means name, and they're third declension nouns. And just look up and down that list a little bit and see what you notice. Notice sarx, we have the square of stops there rather than the kappa sigma. We have the kasi. Genitive singular, we have sarkos. Now, don't be confused by that. You're used to that os ending that looks a lot like a nominative singular, doesn't it, for the second declension, but it's not. It's genitive, okay? We don't have the oo ending here for the third declension. It's os, which again is kind of confusing. Sarki is that dative. Notice we got the iota again. It's not an iota subscript, but we do have an iota signaling us that that's a dative. Sarka is our accusative singular. And then nominative plural sarkes. And then genitive plural sarcone. Look at this. Remember when I told you own, that genitive plural ending was so wonderfully regular? There it is again. It shows up again. And then dative plural sarxi with a movable nu there, right? That movable nu. So if the next word that follows it starts with a vowel, it will have the nu. If the next word starts with a consonant, it will not have the nu. And then finally sarkas there at the end. And let's look at onoma. It's onoma in the nominative singular. Onomatas in genitive singular. Onomati, dative singular. Accusative singular is onoma. Again, notice, just like we saw with the second declension, the nominative and accusative singular are the same form. That's very, very common. That's regular for neuter. And then in the nominative plural, onomata, which is also the accusative plural, that mata ending. Genitive plural, onomatone. Dative plural, onomasi with a movable nu. Okay, let me show you some other ones. This is the tis paradigm, which is the interrogative pronoun. Okay, so it's going to ask who, what, or why. And since it's a pronoun, it's going to have to become all things to all people. It's going to have to be all genders. So we're going to have a more complex paradigm. But look at this one. The masculine and the feminine forms are exactly the same. The neuter form is going to be different, but masculine and feminine are together. We haven't seen this yet, have we? But notice going down the line, tis, and then tinas in the genitive. That os, once again, is going to look nominative singular to you, but don't be tricked. And then tini, and then tina, tines, tinon, our wonderfully regular genitive plural again. Tc with a movable nu there. And tinas. And then the neuter, t, and then tinas. Look, genitive singular is the same all the way across. No matter what gender it shows up in, it's always going to be tinas. And dative singular is the same way, tini. And then accusative singular for the neuter, once again, is t. Nominative plural, notice the tina. And by the way, notice accusative singular is tina. Neuter nominative plural is tina. And notice that accusative neuter plural is also tina. Okay, so that means that form tina can be three different forms. It can be, well, I mean, if you count masculine and feminine as separate, then it can be a whole bunch of different ones. But just know that that's going to play a lot of different roles in a sentence. In some ways, that's good news because there's fewer forms to learn. In some ways, it's bad news because it's a little bit complex. And then we have tinon, again, just like genitive plural for masculine and feminine. Tc, same as on the left there. And then tina, again, we mentioned. Okay? Now, there's another paradigm that I'm not going to put up here that is exactly the same as the one you're looking at, except there's no accent on the lexical form. It's tis without an accent. And that's the one that means a certain one or anyone, like a certain person was walking down the street, or if a certain person were to give up their life to save it, that sort of thing, right? Without the accent in the lexical form. And on that one, if you see it in the book, it's going to have an accent on the second syllable rather than the first. So it's going to be tis, tinas, tini, tina, etc. But the accent is going to be on the second vowel. For those one-syllable words like tis and then t for the neuter, it's just not going to have an accent at all. So here's the fun way to memorize this. My Greek teacher did this to me when I was in seminary learning this back in the day, and I'll do this to you too. This is how you remember, okay? So if you sit in the front of the class, in other words, if the accent's on the first syllable, it's in the front of the word, I want to know who you are. That's what my Greek teacher said. If you sit in the front of the class, I want to know who you are. Because tis, with the accent on the front, means who, or what, or why. If you sit in the back of the class, in other words, if the accent's on the second, or the back end of the word, he said, you aren't anybody, which he was teasing. He didn't really mean that, and I'm teasing. I don't really mean that too. If you're a back row sitter, that's totally fine. But that's just a way to remember. If the accent's on the back, if you sit in the back, you aren't anybody. Okay? Because tis means a certain one, anyone, etc. That's a way you can memorize it. So I only make my Greek students in the first semester memorize 3 paradigms all year. One is the definite article. The second is this tis paradigm, just because tis comes up so much. And since it's kind of strange, it's really good to know. This is your decision. You can decide what you want to do here, but it might be worth just making flashcards for these words and getting good at it, because both forms of tis show up a lot. Let me show you one other one here. This is the pos paradigm. Pos is an adjective, so it's going to need to be masculine, feminine, or neuter, all cases, all genders, all numbers. It's going to need to be able to partner with any sort of noun that it could be matched with. And pos means all, each, or every. It's the same word in Greek, but it'll be translated those different ways in English, all with plural words and each or every with singular words. So like saying all people versus each person. I notice we got a masculine, feminine, and a neuter, and this one's weird. I'll give you a second to look at that. What's weird about this? Can you recognize it? If you look at the masculine, see it's pos, pantos, panti, panta, pantes, etc. If you look at the feminine, you see it's passa, passes, passe, passan. Notice there's no taux in there. What's going on? Well, this is a construction that's different that you haven't seen. This is called a 3-1-3 pronoun, in the sense that masculine and neuter are both third declension. Notice how they have that P, alpha, nu, tau. So because of that, since that tau is the last consonant in the stem, it's going to take third declension endings. But feminine, see how it's P, alpha, sigma, alpha. That passa is the stem for the feminine. So it's going to take first declension endings. So across the top, it would be a 3 masculine, 1 feminine, 3 neuter. Again, this is weird. This is strange. We haven't seen this before. It behaves weirdly. It's good to just spend a little time with this. Now, how confusing will this be in context? Not that confusing, as long as you can recognize this word pos when it shows up and you have some sense of being able to parse it. So for example, this is another one where you see accusative masculine singular panta, and neuter nominative or accusative plural is also panta. So that one, kind of like Tina we saw a minute ago, that one does a lot of things. It has a lot of mileage that it has to get out. Greek gets out of that one word. But that word panta shows up a whole bunch of times in the New Testament because it's kind of the shorthand version of saying all things, right? Jesus will redeem all things to himself, that sort of thing. It's an adjective that's acting substantively with no noun with it, so we're kind of supplying this idea of things. I will redeem panta, all things, to myself, even though the word things doesn't show up. So let's do a little bit of review. We learned third declension nouns, that there's this third declension, this third pattern of the way nouns behave that attaches the endings not to an alpha or an eta like first declension, and not to an omicron like third declension, but instead to a stem that ends in a consonant. And that's going to cause some weirdness. There's going to be some new endings that we have to learn. There's going to be some regular endings. And then there's going to be some endings that are regular, but they behave weirdly because they're matching up with that consonantal stem. We learned Mounce's 4 hints for the third declension. And then we learned a few important third declension words like pos, the adjective, and tis, the pronoun, and tis, the other pronoun. Tis with the accent, meaning who, what, or why, and tis without the accent in the lexical form that has the accent on the second half of the word in the conjugation in the paradigm, meaning a certain one or anyone. That sort of thing. So that's what we learned today, guys. Some important stuff to learn. Spend some time reviewing it. We'll see you next time. God bless.